Thank you to Seroptimus International of Truckee Donor for sponsoring this video. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Lunch with a Scientist. Today, we are joined by Erika and Jonathan. Erika is a fluvial geomorphologist who uses a combination of field measurements, hydraulic and hydrologic modeling, and GIS to understand rivers and how they interact with the Earth's surface. And then Jonathan has been at Balance Hydrologics since 1995. He manages projects quantifying flow hydraulics, riparian roughness, channel morphology, sediment transport, and river restoration projects. So today they're going to tell you all about their really cool work with beaver dams. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks, you're welcome.
So we always start our Lunch with a Scientist with you introducing yourself a little bit and telling us how you got into your current career path.
So Erika and I work at Balance Hydrologics, and what we want to talk today about how we use beaver dams, or things that look like beaver dams and function like beaver dams, to help restore both creeks and the riparian environment, the environment right next to the river around the creek. So at Balance, we'll get into the talk a little bit more, but at Balance we do lots of different things. Creek restoration and being outside is usually one of the most fun parts of what we do, but we do lots of other aspects of hydrology and hydraulics and engineering and modeling as well. As Jennifer mentioned, I've been at Balance since 1995. I was studying engineering sciences as an undergraduate, and I was then exploring other fields and departments for classes that were also fun. And in the school that I went to, in the geology department, is where they had a hydrology class. And once I took that class, I figured out a way to be outside and use all my engineering knowledge and engineering skills and applying it to water and creeks and rivers. And it's still fun 30 years later, so it's pretty cool. One other aspect I should mention is that you can learn a lot of things in school, but I feel like I've learned a lot more by just being outside, looking at creeks and rivers, getting in there, turning over rocks, walking around, and measuring things and observing things. So it's not all schoolwork. It's a lot of just being outside and looking at the environment.
My name is Erika Grow, and I just started at Balance a couple of months ago. Before that, I was getting my undergrad degree and then my master's degree, both in geology. I wanted to be in geology since like second grade. I'm not really sure why or where that came from, but for some reason I got it in my head and I just continued on with it. And I loved it all the way through, so it worked out. Like a lot of people, I got into geology because I just liked being outside and I wanted to just play with rocks. And that has been a really awesome part of it. But I also have realized that geology and hydrology is so much more than just field work. Of course, I'm only showing fieldwork pictures in this slide, but I've also really gotten into modeling rivers and looking at kind of the minute details of how they work on a computer. So whether you love doing field work like me and Jonathan, or you also really enjoy doing computer work and coding even, you can still have a lot of fun with geology. And I got into fluvial geomorphology, which is just a fancy term for looking at rivers and how they interact with the earth, more in the senior year of undergrad and grad school, because that's just a really fun way to look at processes that are happening right then. And you can see the things that you're studying, which is always fun.
So what we're going to be talking about today are some of the benefits of using beaver dams for river restoration. And while Eric and I know a fair bit about hydrology and geomorphology, we're not beaver experts. So we're going to talk a little bit about beavers, but if you want to learn more about beavers, talk to a biologist. We're going to talk more about how they function in the landscape. So some of the topics in our presentation today are: how and why do beavers build their dams? What are some of the natural functions of beaver dams? And then this new jargon term, Beaver Dam Analog, which you hear some people throw around, or a BDA. How are those useful as a restoration tool? We're going to give you a couple of examples from areas around Truckee, where Balance has participated in projects that are using Beaver Dam analogs. And then we'll talk about some beaver pros and cons, or Beaver Dam pros and cons as well. So for why and how do beavers build dams? The first reason is for shelter and protection. Beavers are pretty slow when they're walking on land, and their predators are terrestrial predators, which means the predators walk on land also. So, but beavers are pretty safe when they're in deep, wide water. So that's the main reason that beavers build dams, is to get away from predators. If they make a wide, deep pond, then they're fairly safe. The other reason is for transportation. For them, transportation doesn't mean taking the bus, it means swimming around. And they swim way faster than they walk. They kind of waddle around on land, but they're pretty fast and graceful swimmers. So they're pond building, and then they create little canals through the area that are flooded. Those serve as their highways and their roads and their streets. So that's, we might think of them as engineers, nature's engineers, and we might think they're doing it with they like building or something like that, but it's very functional. The third main reason is for food. And you might ask, well, what do beavers eat? One of the things they eat are young saplings like willows and cottonwoods. They eat the bark off of those. They eat the inner bark. And when beavers spread out the water with their beaver dams, they make the local environment better for growing those trees that they like to eat. So it's a very interesting feedback loop where their functionality for building dams for shelter and protection also work for transportation. It also works for their food source. And I mentioned beavers as nature's engineers. Today we're going to call them nature's hydrologists, because they control the water in their creeks. And they're also their geomorphologists. They shape the landscape. The next thing talking about is, what do they build their dams out of? If I think of a beaver dam, I usually just think it's made out of sticks and logs, because that's what you see in the cartoons of beavers chewing down trees to chop them down. When we go out and look, and when we see beaver dams, we see that sometimes they build them out of rocks, or at least as a bottom layer. They'll move rocks around, or as a stabilizing feature. They put in large sticks. They'll put in small sticks. They'll also, and a lot of times if you just think of a bunch of sticks in a creek, it's not real waterproof. It doesn't form a great dam. But then they'll add grass to the upstream side of their sticks. Then they'll add some like moss and other aquatic vegetation to the upstream side of the grass. And then they'll add mud to the upstream side of that. And by the time they're done, it's a pretty fairly effective dam at stopping and impounding water. And Erika is going to talk about some features that she's seen recently out in a creek just a week or two ago.
Yeah, so I'll start with the two pictures on the upper right and left corners. These are the start of some beaver dams that I saw in the field last week. And I had been to this exact spot 3 weeks before, and there was nothing there. So they're pretty speedy with building their dams. And what I think happened was, we have this constructed riffle that the Forest Service actually made to stabilize this pond. And a riffle is just kind of a mass of cobbles and pebbles that helps kind of lower the erosive or the eroding power of the stream to help it kind of keep a pond in place. And so beavers are often attracted to build a dam by the sound of flowing water. So I think the water dropped low enough that it started making noise as it went over this riffle, and the beavers came and started to build a dam. So you can see that they took some of these pretty good sized cobbles and lined them up in a row to stabilize their dam as kind of like their base level. And then they chewed down some sticks and they laid those across it. Then they took some grasses and some mud and they piled that on top to really stabilize this dam. So that's kind of the start of what they do when they're starting to build a dam. And then you can see the lower left corner picture is a finished beaver dam that I saw doing some field work near Sacramento, actually. This was actually in a pretty heavy populated area, but they came in and built their dam. And you can see upstream of the dam that the water is moving pretty slowly. It's pretty cloudy. It's hard to see when it's so small, but the water's pretty cloudy. And then leaving the beaver dam, it's nice and clear. The grasses upstream of the beaver dam are flourishing and they're happy. And then below the beaver dam, the whole rest of the channel really is pretty incised and needs a little bit of help from some beavers. Then this center picture you can see is a spot where they actually removed a large beaver dam. And this is kind of a cross section of a beaver lodge that matches the little schematic in the top middle, where they have these little channels that they build underneath the beaver dam so they can access from the water. And then there's also on the left hand of the picture, you can see a little opening that they have so they can access it from the ground if they don't want to access from the water. All right, next slide.
So this slide outlines some of the ways that beaver dams help the environment. In how it changes the environment, how it functions in the environment. One of the big ones that geomorphologists and hydrologists like to talk about is that it traps sediment. So if there's fine sediment or coarse sediment coming down the creek channel, because it's slowing the water down and because the dam is there, then a lot of that sediment filters out. So it can trap quite a bit of sediment. It stores water when the ponds are full. The photo on the right shows if you can see a little bit of open water. You can see the dam all the way on the right-hand side, shows up a little bit lighter. This one's not real full at the moment. Recently, there was a breach in the dam and it would create a little mini flood downstream. So hydrologists are interested in that also. But when the dams are in good repair, they store quite a bit of water, and that can help releasing water slowly through the season during the dry season when there's not a lot of water downstream. It creates this wide, moist riparian area because it spreads the water out sideways when you build a dam. So you get willows, you get cottonwood, you get swamps, you get marshes, you have meadows, you have ponds. There's this cool, dynamic, and diverse environment. With those wetlands, you get the wetland plants and animals. You get all sorts of extra fish. It's good for the juvenile rearing of fish. You have ducks and geese. They love areas of open water, especially when it's interspersed with wetlands and shrubs and sedges and rushes. And in this case, if you look carefully on the upper left side of the photo, the aerial image there is looking straight down. You see some lighter green color that used to be a beaver dam and a beaver pond, but it filled in with sediment, then it got colonized by wetland vegetation, and now it's turned into a beaver meadow. So it's no longer open water, but it's still a very productive environment. In addition, when the water spreads out and goes up the banks, and as in some of Erika's photos that she showed before, it also raises the groundwater level in the banks of the creek next to the creek channel. So, and that can help, even if it's not necessarily wetland vegetation, it can help the trees on the edges of the pond and the marsh get more water also.
So this is a schematic of the geomorphic benefits of beaver ponds. So if you start with figure A, you can see that there's a single channel that has incised down, which just means cutting down into the earth. And it has separated the floodplain from accessing surface water. So you can see the trees on the floodplain are all dying off because they no longer have access to surface water. And they also don't have access to groundwater because when a channel incisors, it actually lowers the groundwater table because the groundwater in most cases will be at the same elevation as the lowest channel elevation. So this schematic is actually basically what we look for in a lot of our river restoration projects as a landscape that needs some help to get back to how it should look naturally. And so if you have some of these beaver dams or beaver dam analogs come in and they're built across the channel, they start to slow the water down. They start to agrade the channel, which means filling in with sediment and raising the elevation of the channel bed. And they start to also, as the water tries to flow around these beaver dams, it'll create a more sinuous channel. And that will help you start to build back up some more of this riparian vegetation, some nice grasses and trees. You start to get a multi-threaded channel. So the channel is going in a bunch of different directions and it has like a braided nature to it. And eventually you get to this last picture on the bottom right, which is really what we're trying to get a landscape to look like from that first figure, which is you have all these trees and these grasses growing. The channel is multi-threaded, it's sinuous, it's connected to its floodplain, and that's a really healthy, natural landscape. And then you can also see that the water table has then risen back up to a proper level so that the trees can access that groundwater, even in the summertime when some of those side channels might be dry. So we mentioned that there are these things called Beaver Dam Analogs or BDAs. And this is a tool that we use in river restoration to kind of fake a beaver dam. So a lot of times when we come in to restore a channel, it's gotten to the point where it doesn't support beavers anymore because their food isn't there. The conditions are just really not great for beavers. And so we're trying to copy the benefits of beaver dams without actually having the beavers there. So what we'll do is we start with this picture on the upper left that shows people pounding in these big stakes across the channel in a straight line. And then you can see in the upper right-hand corner, they'll take these riparian trees and sticks and things that beavers would also use, and they'll line them across the channel in like a beaver dam would. And then they'll actually weave them between the sticks to make them a little bit more stable. And then the lower right side shows a finished BDA, which, you know, looks a little bit like a beaver dam, and it functions like a beaver dam where it will slow down the water, it'll capture sediment, it will kind of stabilize the channel bottom. And a lot of times, once we create these BDAs, it'll actually attract beavers to the project site. And they'll look at that and they'll say, that's fine, but I could do a lot better. Let me fix this for you. You guys are struggling. Let's help out. So they'll come in and they will fill in the BDAs and make it more like a true beaver dam. And that will start to set off the process where the landscape will actually like revive itself. And so we've just given it a start, and the beavers will come in and help us restore this channel so that they have the habitat and the food and the protection that they're really looking for, which also helps bring back the meadow, which is our ultimate goal. So this is a project that we did in the Truckee, California area. And so picture A on the upper left is showing what the channel looked like prior to us doing a project. So it looked kind of like that first picture that I showed in the last schematic where the channel is really incised. It's a single threaded channel. And what you can notice about all the vegetation along these banks and in the background is that it's all like these desert shrubs. It's a lot of sage. And that's fine. But in this area, we have a lot of that. And we really don't have a lot of wetland vegetation that a lot of protected animals really need. So it's something that we, in this case, really wanted to get rid of, so that we could attract in a lot of the different species that need more of wetland vegetation. So picture B in the upper right corner shows right after installation of these BDAs or Beaver Dam analogs, where that's just the start of what we were trying to do. And then pictures C and D on the bottom are taken from 2022. So this is what this project looks like now. And you can see that all of this rich green riparian vegetation has come in. This beaver dam is actually showing a beaver dam analog that we started that has then been filled in by some beavers, and it's been made a lot better. You can see the water ponding behind the beaver dam. In picture D, you can see a lot of that sage is dying off and it's being replaced by grasses and trees and things that are going to be a lot better for the environment there. And so for this project, they started by installing 49 beaver dam analogs. And in 2022, when they went to go check on the project, there was a total of 34 beaver dams when there had not been, I think there had been 9 maybe before that. So the beavers were trying to live there, but not really thriving. And after this project, they are really thriving and just taking over and really helping us in our restoration. And next slide. So these are just some pictures from the Martis Valley Restoration Project. The top row is showing pre-project. You can see it's just this straight single channel with a lot of shrubs and desert vegetation on the edges. It's pretty incised, and it's really just not looking like it's all that healthy of a natural environment. And then during project construction, really the 2 main things that we did was install these beaver dam analogs, which you can see on the right side in the middle. And then on the left side, you can see we installed these fibrous mats with some grass seeds underneath them, which is just to really encourage these grasses to come in and grow. And then we also added a little bit of fill on the sides to create a more sinuous channel. And then on the bottom row, you can see what it looks like now post-project in 2022. It's really green, the sages are dying and the vegetation's growing in. The water table has risen to match its floodplain, and you have a really healthy natural channel with a meadow attached to it.
Yeah, the photos on the left show what used to be a straight channel, and we filled in the old channel and meandered made a big curve in the channel around it. So we increased the length of the channel, which also slows the water down a little bit, makes it friendlier for both the habitat and for the beavers. And when I went out to this site with Erika, I didn't know that the beavers had reoccupied so many of the BDAs that got built. And I was looking at one and said, wow, this BDA was really well done. It's accumulating sticks and grass from upstream, but it wasn't just doing it on its own. The beavers were helping out and reinforcing the BDAs that were built the year and two and 3 years before that. So that's really neat to see.
And here's a picture of a beaver on its way to build a beaver dam. Oh, nope, that's my dog.
So another meadow restoration project that Balance worked on with a number of other partners is in the Parazzo Meadows, and this is one. It's up near Jackson Meadows Road, and there's a good overlook. There's a road nearby where you can look down and look at the project. This project involved a bunch of channel fill, where the old channel had been partially straightened. It had down cut quite a bit. And so we were repairing it in two different ways. One was adding channel fill. The other was adding Beaver Dam analogs in order to help stabilize the new sand and gravel that we put into the old river channel, as well as spread it out sideways to get the water to flood the existing floodplains even more. And in this case, we weren't really expecting beavers to come back, even though we did spot some. There's a very small beaver colony with a very modest beaver dam in the project area. Go on to the next slide. In this case, this is right after we put the water back in the channel, a couple of days after the water went back in. And you can see sort of the middle at the upper end of that ponded water area is a sort of a linear feature. And that's a Beaver Dam analog that spreads the water out across the channel into the floodplain. You'd have to look with a microscope or a telescope, but there are a couple other Beaver Dam analogs upstream from there. But creating these wide areas of open water and at higher water, flooding the bases of the willow trees so that it's good for the environment whether beavers show up or not, but it also makes it a lot easier for beavers to move around in this area. You can go on to the next slide. These are some of a different style of Beaver Dam analog. Sort of a similar idea. We can use some vertical posts, but these were built by a combination of the restoration workers as well as volunteers. These are something that can be done with hand tools. We organized it under the supervision of hydrologists and geomorphologists to go out and build these beaver dams to help stabilize the sand and spread the water out. And they're growing in well. Some of them, the water, if there's a high storm flow, it'll wash out some of these and leave just pieces of them. But that's part of the design, is that they're flexible. They can get washed away and end up somewhere else. It adds more wood to the system, and it keeps it dynamic. It doesn't keep the exact pool and the exact riffle and the exact sandbar in the exact same place. It's okay if these things move and shift around and meander like rivers are prone to meander. On to the next slide. This is an aerial view. The sandy area on the left is the channel that we filled in with sand and gravel. The little arrow is pointing to a part of a BDA that's helping hold back sediment. In the center is a pretty healthy stand of willows that was a little bit dry before we did the restoration project, but now, if you can tell by the reflection in the dark water in there, is well inundated, and the willows are very happy in there. And some tall, like knee-high rushes and reeds and sedges off to the left where you see the reflection. Those have also, those were pretty dry before, but are now inundated most of the year. So it's really spreading it out, where the water used to be pretty much confined to a narrow channel. Now the water spreads out 4, 5, 6 times wider than it used to be.
So we've talked about some of the geomorphic benefits of beavers or beaver dam analogs to restore a landscape and get it happy and healthy. We mentioned how it spreads the water out, it ponds, it helps support vegetation. It can help create a more sinuous channel, which is a good thing in geomorphology. It can create multi-threaded channels. It can filter the water to make it cleaner, and all of those things. One of the things we haven't talked about yet, which I think is really cool, especially with how our world is changing right now, is the benefits of beaver dams for wildfire. So you can see these two bottom pictures. The entire canyon has burned from a massive wildfire. But there was this beaver dam complex throughout here that has kept the channel and the floodplain wet and actually protected it from wildfire. So a lot of times when we're thinking about restoring a meadow and putting in these BDAs and wetting a wider area, it's not just about the environment or the channel health or the animals that will be helping the vegetation. It also can function as a wildfire break to protect the surrounding areas. Beaver dams and beaver dam analogs also help filter out the ash from wildfires to help that it doesn't clog fish gills and things like that. So it's really important out in the West to have these really rare meadows and wetlands.
So sometimes beavers and people can come into conflict. If a beaver dam is flooding your driveway or your backyard, or it's or they clog up a culvert in order to pond the water upstream from the road or a railroad track or something like that, or if they're chewing down your favorite cottonwood trees, because cottonwoods are very yummy. It's the favorite one of the favorite things for beavers to eat. So there are ways to do that. You see some fencing around the trees. It's also a general concept called a beaver deceiver, which Erika earlier mentioned, that beavers are somewhat attracted by the sound of rushing water or falling water to try to stop that, or to raise their water level. But with a combination of some fencing and grates and culverts and plastic pipes and tubing, or metal pipes and tubing, you can control the water level of the pond, or the whatever the beavers are doing that's coming into conflict with people, without the beavers really feeling a need to go and try to fix it and make the water level even higher. So there are ways to deal with them besides trapping them or killing them. And given that usually the benefits will outweigh the hassle of dealing with the beavers, there are ways to deal with them in a friendly and sensitive way. And if you're interested more about beavers and the ways to work with beavers, the benefits of beavers, more about their biology than I know, then this is a great book. It's called Eager: The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. And you can look that up online. And it's an interesting read. It's not a boring textbook.
Well, thank you for presenting all the information about your work with beavers. I was fascinated, but it reminded me so much of the wolves of Yellowstone, how they act as like that trophic cascade. And a lot of our teachers and students are going to be watching this are in one of the life sciences. And I know that that's a big topic, trophic cascades, food web, food chain, keystone species. So what role do you think that beavers really are going to be playing as far as their environment goes in relation to those things?
Yeah, and I think I think that beavers do play a role in that Yellowstone story. That some of it is getting rid of cattle. So in some cases, if you want to restore a creek, the beavers need the willows to eat, both to make their dams out of and to eat them for food. Beavers will even, I've seen in the bottoms of beaver dams, a whole collection of willow sticks laid out for the winter food when the top of the water would be frozen. So they, without their food source, that's often the limiting factor to getting beavers back. Because once they have the food source and they have a little bit of deep water, then they can act as one of those keystone species where they spread the water out, and then it's probably easier for the elk in the Yellowstone story to hide from the wolves. Also, if the elk are pretty good at wading out into a beaver marsh, that's even better protection than just hiding in the willows. So it's really interesting because they change the soil, they change the water availability, and then they grow. It's their own little cycle where the more beavers you have, the more the water spreads out, and then the more beaver food that it grows. So it's I really enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, they're really great at creating the environment that attracts a lot of these animals that larger predators eat, and so it kind of helps that whole cycle of bringing in more predators, and then that helps actually the prey survive better. And they're great at creating these big ponds that fish like to live in and spawn in and things. So a lot of times, we're also concerned with endangered fish species. And so we'll do river restoration projects that help create these fish habitat to help the whole ecosystem.
So interesting. Never knew beavers were that important to their little ecosystem. I always knew that it helped with the way the water moves, but it's just so interesting that they take on so many different roles and function in an ecosystem. So I had another question. So I thought it was really interesting where you discussed how it acted it broke where the fire went. Did you see in that area that, ecological succession was able to come back faster? Like, was it replenished in that area a lot quicker than those places that didn't have the beavers present?
So those pictures were from a different study that someone did, I think as part of their PhD research. So we weren't specifically involved in that project, but if I had to guess, I would think yes, just because the rest of the environment is having to come back from this huge disturbance, and the Beaver Dam pretty much stayed exactly the same, the Beaver Dam complex and that whole river system. So I would think that would help kind of jumpstart the recovery process and allowing at least a safe haven for the time being for all these animals that were displaced during the wildfire to at least have some sort of food to eat and water access so that that can start rebuilding.
Yeah, I think it's still an area of active research. And I think a cool research project could be how well does a system with BDAs and beavers, or just like actual beavers, function compared to a restoration where you just had the BDAs but no actual beavers moved in? What are the differences in function for how resilient they are to fire for those two different conditions?
It's so interesting. So just like with most of the scientists we talk to, we're always asking questions. There's always something new for us to, keep researching and moving forward. I just wanted to thank you guys again for taking the time to share all of your amazing information with Headwaters and with our students and teachers. And we just appreciate it because we can't do our programs without scientists being willing to share their information. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. We loved it.
Want to learn more about our Lunch with the Scientist program? Make sure to like and subscribe and visit us online at www.headwaterscienceinstitute.org for a full list of our video library and curriculum.